What's up, model makers? I was just doing a little bit of work here and kind of had a spur of the moment urge to make a quick little video for my model making fundamentals set because what I'm doing is pretty fundamental. I've got this aircraft project that I'm working on and I've been spending some time removing all the gate remnants before I get ready to do all my test fit of the assembly. And this is a perfect situation for using one of my favorite tools that you guys have heard me mention, which is my super sharp 6-inch mill bastard file. I don't know why it's called a bastard file because I love it. This is a good situation for it. So what I'm going to do is just real quickly explain why I prefer using a file in a situation like this as opposed to some other abrasive tool, and just kind of show you how I work it, and you can get an idea of some basic file handling skills. Okay, first things first, let's take a look at a file up close because this is there's some important things to know about a file. I mean, the most important one is that they are designed only to cut in one direction, and that's away from the tang. So that direction. And you can see why when you take a close look at the surface of it. If you look, you can see that the blades are angled on one side, and that's the direction, and that's on the side opposite where the cutting takes place. So what happens when you push the file across the surface of your workpiece, each one of those little blades acts basically like a scraper, and that's how it does its thing. If you drag the file back this way, then that's when you knock the edge off those blades, and that's what makes them dull, especially if you're working on a hard material like steel. It's not such a big deal with plastic because it will abrade to a certain degree the material if you're dragging it like this, but it's just not nearly as efficient as going this way. Now, the other thing is you got to keep them clean, and this one is pretty dirty. I've left it that way just to show you because I've been using it. And when they get clogged up, they definitely do not work as well. Now, when you're working with plastics, you can keep them clean pretty well by just doing this. I just wipe them off on my sleeve, and you can get most of the stuff out of them while you're doing your job. You can see how much I got cleaned out of there. Now, if they really get dirty, what you need to use is a wire brush and just scrub all that stuff out of there. And if it's super bad, then you can use like some lacquer thinner or some MEK or some other type of plastic destroying solvent and really scrub that out with a toothbrush or a wire brush. Okay, so that's files. Now, why would I pick a file instead of something like a sanding stick or a sponge? And it's all about the fact that this is a rigid cutting surface. And here's why that's important. I've got this project that I'm working on here where I've got lots of gate stubs to remove, and that's a perfect situation to explain this. Now, this is a UMP sanding stick, thinning stick actually, and these things are wonderful. I use them all the time, but it's not necessarily the right thing for a job like these gate stubs, and here's why. Okay, sanding sticks in general are made to be flexible and a little bit squishy. Okay, you can see with my finger I can squeeze that. Now that's great if you've got an irregular surface and you want to keep it that way. But when I have a little nub sticking up here like I do with this gate remnant right here, what happens is that if I use the sanding stick to try and remove that, then what happens is that the sanding stick rides up over the surface or the tip of the little nub, but still keeps working adjacent to it, and you can kind of see that. Hopefully, let me try to get this at a better angle. you can see where I just took a couple of swipes at that, and you can see how it's worked on the tip of the nub, but it's also worked right next to it. That may be really hard to see, but hopefully the angle will show you that. And so what's going to happen is that by the time I get the nub sanded all the way down, I'm going to have a couple of divots on either side of it that are going to ruin the straightness of that line right there. And a file, on the other hand, doesn't have any of that flex. So I can take and clear some of this stuff out of the way, and hopefully this will stay focused a little bit better. So I can work across that surface and get a nice planar cut. Now, one thing about a file is that it can rock side to side, obviously. So if I've got a nub right there, if I'm not careful, I could rock the file and I could still end up gouging on either side of that little protrusion. So you do have to be careful of that. But one way that you prevent that is by getting as much of the flat surface of the file working on your along your workpiece as possible. If I just come straight across like this, then I only have a little bit of surface to support the file, and it's going to rock more. But if I angle it like this, now it's much more difficult for the file to rock back and forth and create that and create a divot. And so I end up with a much more planar cut. And when you get that little bit of fuzz on the edge, you just come along, take one quick swipe, or a couple of quick swipes, and there you go. Nice, clean, sharp edge. Now, I really like using a file for things like these gate remnants because of everything that I've been saying there about the way that the file works and the fact that it does its work in a very precise way. So I'm not going to worry like I would with a sanding stick about screwing up the surface of that leading edge right there on either side of that gate remnant. But one disadvantage, obviously, is that a file can leave a flat spot in a hurry if you're not careful, and it can leave scratches. So the trick is to work with light passes, make them as long as you can, because the file is obviously a lot more efficient if you are working like this as opposed to doing this, and definitely better than doing this. So here we go. I'm going to attempt to get where I can see it a little bit better. I'm going to attempt to get where I can cut this off of here and keep everything on the screen at the same time. It's kind of a challenge when I've got my Optivisor on and I keep banging my head against the back of the camera. But you can kind of see what I'm doing here. Hopefully it'll stay in focus enough. Now, the thing that I was saying about flat spots is important. When you're working on a curved surface like this leading edge, obviously you have to be conscious to rock the file as you make the stroke so that it follows that curved surface as closely as possible and doesn't leave you with that flat spot. All right, but you can see, I don't know how well it showed up while I was doing it, but you can see that I have pretty effectively smoothed down that gate remnant without leaving a flat spot. But what I do have, you can see, are some deep scratches there. There's some little gouges. Oh, and look, our friend the fly is back. Now, those little gouges are where the sanding stick comes in. So what I want to do there is just come back and as much as possible work perpendicular to those scratches and just very lightly finish those out. And you can see that we pretty well took care of those. They're not deep, so no big deal. Got a little bit more one over here to take care of. And then what I do is come back with a nice, like a finer grit sponge. And again, just going in a perpendicular direction to where I was traveling before, then I come back and smooth all that off. And so I've got that leading edge nicely cleaned up. And the worst that I'm going to have to deal with, which I will have to do anyway after I fill the gap along this edge right here, or the seam, is come back and rescribe a little bit of these panel lines that wrap around that leading edge surface. So there you go. You can see exactly how that works. Now, what I also have to deal with on this particular thing is that there is part of the gate remnant on the back side of the joint. And I've clipped most of it off with my super sharp Gundam Planet nippers, but there still obviously is a little bit of a remnant there. And this again is where a file really is the right tool, because I have a planar surface obviously that I need to maintain for that joint when I glue the two halves of the wing together. And I don't have to worry about any scratches or anything when I do this one. I just have to focus on getting it nice and flat. And this really is a good tool for that. You can see I've got a bigger one here. A little bit more I had to cut than on the other one. But by doing it this way, I can pretty well rest assured that I'm not going to introduce any kind of waviness or any gouges in the planar surface of this joint that would end up making it just more work for me when I go to fill the leading edge seam when the two halves of the wing come together. Sorry about that. So you can see nice and clean and sharp, just like I want it for assembly. So there you go, just a little bit on using a file. Okay, so there you go. Pretty quick, pretty simple, nothing really magic there, but it's definitely one of those tools where technique really matters, and having a tool that's in really good condition is important. These, little 6-inch files are pretty inexpensive. You don't have to spend a lot of money on one, especially given that we're just working in soft plastic and materials like that, resin sometimes. But definitely it's not like we are filing tool steel or anything like that. So an inexpensive 6-inch file like this is really a powerful tool to have at your workbench, and hopefully I've given you a little bit better idea of how to use one to your advantage. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Much love.